Welcome back, everyone, to day 2 of our 2020 virtual annual conference, Recrafting Gardens in a Changed World. I'm Casey Sklar, the Executive Director of the American Public Gardens Association. Welcome. We're excited about today's program in this new format, and we hope you enjoy it. We've made navigating between these sessions throughout the day as easy as possible. But again, if you need any help, our exceptional staff is waiting right in the wings to help you, and all you need to do is email us at info@publicgardens.org, or if needed, pick up the phone and call us at 610-708-3010 in the United States of America +1 code. As you know, we'd originally planned to have our in-person conference this year in the beautiful city of Portland, Oregon, led by our gracious host, the Portland Japanese Garden, but in collaboration with many of the other gardens in the Portland and Oregon area. Unfortunately, those plans are changed, like so many other things, by the pandemic, which is why you're looking at me on a computer screen, as ugly as I am, and not up there behind the podium where I'm further away from you in a socially distant fashion. And I'm really sorry. But don't despair, because instead of being stuck in the downtown Hilton, now you can go anywhere right around your home or around the office. So it's great. But look, speaking of Portland, a dear city that I used to call home many years ago, we are very happy to announce that we're going to look forward to returning there in the near future. And today, we're happy to have Steve Bloom from the Portland Japanese Garden as today's plenary speaker. So you'll see a generous dose of Portland represented throughout the conference, along with its special flavor. This is also a very appropriate time to present the first of several awards you're going to hear about throughout the conference. These are individuals and institutions that have achieved excellence. And through a rigorous process, they've been selected by their peers to receive these awards. Those peers are those amongst you, our members, and our awards committee, who should be recognized for their service and their excellence, especially this year. Our first award celebrates garden excellence by an institution. If you've ever been to this garden, you know it's a unique fusion of traditional garden style in harmony with the native environment that surrounds it. It has been called the most beautiful and authentic expression of the style outside of its country or origin. We are pleased to present this year's award for garden excellence to the Portland Japanese Garden.
Hi, my name is Dory Vollum, and I'm talking to you today from Portland, Oregon, where you can see it's a nice, beautiful, rainy day. I'm here to introduce my friend and colleague, Steve Bloom. I've served on the board of trustees for the Portland Japanese Garden for the past 10 years. I was board president for 2, and I was campaign chair for the expansion project at the garden for many years. So Steve and I worked very closely together, and I got to know him very well, both as an incredible, resourceful, and strategic fundraiser, and more importantly, as a dear friend. There's very few people in my life that I've met that I respect and admire more. He has incredible institutional knowledge about how to run a garden. He's warm, he's generous, he's personable, he's a lot of fun to be with. He made the job of raising $37.5 million actual fun, which surprises a lot of people. But we had a good time doing it, and I learned a lot, and he has a lot of knowledge to share. So I'm very happy that he's able to speak to you today. Unfortunately, not in person. Hopefully that day will come soon where you can all visit us in Portland, but the next best thing. So thank you for listening.
Good afternoon and welcome from the Portland Japanese Garden. We were hoping to welcome you all here in person, but of course that didn't happen, unfortunately. But we are nimble, I think, as a field, and so we're making do, and thank you to APGA for putting on this wonderful virtual conference. I'm here today to talk to you about building bridges and building community as a garden, as an organization. And I think we all do that in our own time, in our own way as an institution, as an organization. But I want to talk about it a little bit differently. I want to talk about it as really a philosophy on how we operate our organizations and how we run our gardens, because I think that it can make all the difference between having all kinds of resources that you never thought were even available to you when you approach this from the standpoint of building bridges and building communities. So what I would first say is that as a philosophy, you want this idea of building bridges and building communities, expanding your networks to be part of everything you do in your organization. So build it into your planning. We all have strategic plans. We all have annual plans. We have project plans. We have departmental plans. Within each of those, what we have done here at the Portland Japanese Garden is that we have built this concept in and we've been strategic about it. So don't do it by accident. Don't do it by, oh, at this point we need this, so we're going to go out and find it. But always think about all the needs that you have and where you're going institutionally, organizationally, and what direction, and what needs you might have down the road so that you can begin to plan for having those kinds of relationships that you want either institutionally or individually to further your mission, to further the work that you're doing. So it's important to talk to your leadership about this. It's one thing for you to practice this and to have those people who support you practice it, but talk to your board about why this strategy is important. And I hope by the time that I'm done talking with you today, you're going to understand and agree how it can be so important. So talk with your leadership about it. Talk with your executive team, with the boards that you work with your donors as well. Because sometimes the strategies that you will put in place will not have immediate or apparent benefits, but that doesn't mean you should be doing them. And sometimes we do things that we don't know what the immediate benefits are going to be. So it's important people understand the approach that you're taking. It's also important to understand your landscape for your organization, for your garden, no pun intended. What is a landscape and what are your fields that you are in? We at the Portland Japanese Garden, we are in many different fields. We are not just a botanical garden. We're not just a public garden. We are a Japanese cultural center. We are an environmental organization. We are an educational institution. So each of us, as public gardens, we all wear different hats. So it's important for you to go back, to sit with your team and to say, who are our constituents? What is our field? What are our fields, actually? And understand the landscape so that you can start building those strategies around what are the relationships that you want to have and you need to move forward with out there. And I would also say from that standpoint, and we place this in our strategic plan, is that we have different communities, and we have local communities, we have national communities, and we have international communities. So when you think about this, you may think of yourself as a local organization, but when you think about the networks and the resources that you need for your organization, you should think local, because that's important, and that's the heart and soul of where you are. It's your physical location. But you should also think global, because there are so many other resources and relationships out there that aren't in your community that can come to bear on the work that you do every day. And again, you don't know when you're going to pull those triggers, but it's important to understand where those might be and where those might lead you towards furthering the work that you're doing. So don't restrict yourself. Don't think, oh, gee, we are here in Portland and we're only going to deal with Portland organizations or institutions. We wrote into our strategic plan that we will serve our local, national, international communities. And so we have specific strategies in each year in our action plan that comes out of our strategic plan around each of those communities and how we're going to move forward and how we're going to serve those communities, and then how those communities in turn will end up serving us. So when I talk about being strategic, it's not just local, but think national, think global. And don't let yourself be a barrier to others who are not in your community participate with you. So oftentimes we have found that we wanted this national speaker, or we wanted this international resource. And in a committee meeting, we'll talk about, well, we want to go out and get Joe Smith from Tokyo to give us a talk. And everyone at the table is like, Joe Smith will never come to Portland. We're not important enough. And I would say to everybody, I would say, let's let Joe Smith answer that question. Why would we answer that question for him? And I think you'll find that many times people will engage with you, even though they're not in your community. So don't make those answers, don't give those answers, because it's going to be an answer that you don't want if you automatically restrict yourself. But there's always a chance that someone may say yes down the road. So within each of those communities, define also the other local communities and resources. Write this down on paper. Get very specific about it. And as I mentioned before, do some things philosophically. This is it's an approach that not everybody, in particular from your board, will understand. But do things that you might not know the outcomes for. But you hope that someday it will build a relationship down the road. Events are a great example of that. Whether it's donor events or program-related events. When you do these events, and maybe you're doing them in your own community or at your garden or out in the community or out in one of your other communities, when you do these events, you're meeting people and you're building these bridges. And those things, in the weirdest ways, will come back around. You want to build the biggest tent possible to bring all of these resources to your organization. And you also need to the reason you talk about this as an organization and with your leadership is because you want people to understand that what you're doing is you're building a bigger tent, right? Your garden needs a bigger tent, and you're going to be bringing more people in who are going to have different ideas and different expertise and different approaches to programs and ideas and the implementation of the things that you do at your garden every day. Now, to the people who have been with your garden for many years, that at times can feel threatening, right? Who's this person from here coming in and telling us, or this expert from outside, or even locally? This has always been our garden. We've always done it this way. So creating this atmosphere and this culture for your organization in which everybody has an open mind, and because everybody has ownership of your garden, that's involved with your garden right now, it helps them to realize that, as difficult as it may seem, that this garden is not more one person's than it is another. Because you have this view and this vision for this garden doesn't mean that the garden isn't something else to someone else. And so creating this big tent so that we can all fit in under this big tent, we can all respect each other. So just think about those issues as you move forward. I think one of the other things to think about strategically in this approach is not overreaching your institutional capacity. To realize when is the right time to begin a new relationship. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up here. But don't overreach. Understand the human resources that you have, the time that you have, the financial resources you have as you go into these relationships and you begin to spread your wings outside of what you would consider to be your typical community. And then I think this one is really important, and we don't think about this enough. And I'm going to call it brand alliances in terms of thinking about your organization and the kind of organization that you are and the kinds of individuals, institutions, organizations that you want to be aligned with. You want organizations that perhaps have shared values, right? So that we have the same idea, we're marching in the same direction, and we can, in a chorus with multiple voices, move our mission forward. Sometimes you want organizations that have a different point of view because you want to have a conversation about something. So don't throw that out the window. It's not just about shared values, but also counterpoints to what some of your beliefs are too. And that can bring a depth and breadth of conversation into the work that you do as an organization. For us at the Portland Japanese Garden, we're really fortunate. We have for a long time been considered by the field in Japan to be the most authentic Japanese garden in the world outside of Japan. And so that is a badge of honor that we have worn for a very long time and we take very seriously. We just completed a $37 million construction project to build a cultural village. And one of the philosophies that we went into that project with was that we were not going to do anything in that project that was not of equal or greater quality than the existing garden, that we didn't want to water anything down. So you need to think about that in terms of your programming and your relationships out there as well. These are brand alliances, and the people that you work with and the things that you do and the institutions that you align yourself say things about you as an organization, as an institution. So you want to think about that before you rush into an agreement with or a relationship with an organization, or the kinds of speakers that you're inviting in. Because those are going to send messages to your members, to your visitors, to your constituents, to your community, to the field about who and what you are by those alliances. And then the other important thing, I think, is it's not just about, so for us, we say we're going to do things of equal or greater quality, but you also have to leave the door open for fostering those who are coming up in the field, right? So we have close to 300 public Japanese gardens in North America. Well, if we said we're only going to have alliances with gardens that are of equal or greater quality than us, well, that creates a problem. And so we understand that we also have a role in fostering other organizations and individuals that we see promise in, that we know are serious about the craft, that are serious about the field, that are serious about their mission and about the work that we do. So shared values are important. Counterpoint values are important. The quality of the people that you align yourselves are important. And then fostering others and bringing people up to help raise the bar for all those around us. Because you never know what organizations or individuals are going to be doing in the future and what you'll want to be doing with them as well. So that's kind of the philosophical approach to all of this. I want to talk a little bit now about implementation, about how do how does this manifest itself from a very practical standpoint. One of the things, I have two curators on my staff. We have a curator of culture, art, and education, who's really a program director. And then I have a garden curator, and their job is to oversee the design, maintenance, and construction of the garden, but also education programs that are centered around garden items. And so these two curators work very closely together, and along with myself, we provide the vision moving forward for the organization on an ongoing basis. We sit down once a quarter and we talk about these issues, about where are we going as an organization. And we're not just thinking about what are we doing next week. As a matter of fact, these are not at all about what we're doing next week. These are about what are we doing a year from now? What are we doing 5 years from now? What are we doing 10 years from now? But we have those conversations every quarter. We call them I call them my curator quarterlies. And so we have a chance to just talk without the day-to-day hustle and bustle of everything else going on about visioning and about the future. So one of the most important things that we do in these is we talk about strategic alliances. And we talk about if we're going to accomplish this in the next 5 years or this in the next 10 years, what kind of relationships do we need out there, whether it be in Portland or whether it be in New York or whether it be in Tokyo, to fulfill these things, because we know they don't happen overnight. And so we begin to talk about it so that, as you all know, relationships take time to build. And so in going in to any of the strategies that we implement, we want time to build that relationship first. Very rarely do we just pick up the phone and say, hey, next week we're doing this, come and join us. But rather it's been a really strategic and really thought out path to that relationship, which then brings that person or that organization into the fold and helps us to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Now, these can be individuals, these can be organizations, these can be companies, and they can be grassroots. They can be the little old man down the road who does bonsai, or it could be the chairman of the biggest corporation in Japan. Or it could be grassroots or it could be professional. And you want to think across all of those spheres because, for us, we work in all of those circles. And it's, again, it's really paying attention to all of our constituencies out there. And then one of the other things that we've done is we create formal relationships with the people that we want to work with. Now, one of the obvious ways that we do this is we as organizations have board of directors, right? And our boards are our ambassadors out there. They bring resources to the organization. Well, so that's one great strategy for that. And so what if you were to have multiple groups and support groups and boards, and to think about it that way, that each one of those boards, each one of those organizations and associations, they bring a whole separate set of relationships, of expertise to the work that we do. So we actually have 3 boards. When I arrived at the garden 15 years ago, we had one board, which was just the operating board of the organization. We created a second board, which was a foundation board, which oversees our assets in terms of endowment and real estate and such, and oversees our planned giving program. And then we created a third board, which is called our International Advisory Board. And that is made up of 14 people here in North America, and 14 people in Japan, someone in Singapore, someone in Bangkok, someone in London. And those are all people who understand the work that we're doing, and they want to help bring resource to that. They want to leverage what they have to bring resources to helping us achieve our mission and our plans. So I'm going to bring up this photo. This photo here is a photo of some of the leadership of my International Advisory Board in Japan. And the reason I bring this up is I want to talk to you about leveraging relationships. The gentleman on the end, the very tall Japanese gentleman, is Mr. Kengo Kuma. And he started this whole track for creating our International Advisory Board for me as a CEO, and that he opened doors for me in Japan. So when we hired him to design this amazing cultural village here, on the day that I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, "Congratulations, you've been the one selected to design this new village for us." He was thrilled, and then at the end of the call I said, "And I'm going to be in Tokyo next month, Kengo, and I need you to do one thing for me." And he said, "What?" And I said, "I'd like you to introduce me to Mr. Nezu." Now, Mr. Nezu is standing there with the red tie, he and his wife next to him. And Mr. and Mrs. Nezu are, people refer to them as kind of the Rockefeller family of Japan, an old industrialist family who have been great philanthropists in Japan. They have one of the greatest Asian art collections in Japan. They have the Nezu Museum, which was also designed by Kengo Kuma. So I knew if I had an introduction to Mr. Nezu, and I made our case for the work that we're doing, that perhaps he would want to join the team. So the next time I went back, indeed, Kengo Kuma, because I just gave him this job, I leveraged that job to get a dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Nezu. And so I got to meet Mr. and Mrs. Nezu, and I invited them to Portland, and they saw the garden and the work that we're doing, and they really became interested and enthralled with the quality of the garden, and that it's outside of Japan, and how we're using the garden to teach so many things about Japanese art and culture, so that they became the founding members of our International Advisory Board. Well, you can imagine now I have the Rockefellers of Japan founding my International Advisory Board. So imagine here in the United States, if you had a Rockefeller to found your International Advisory Board, just how many doors that could open. So the next thing we did was we held a big event at the Nezu Museum. The brand new Nezu Museum, designed by Kengo Kuma and hosted by the American ambassador and by Mr. Nezu, because Mr. Nezu asked the ambassador to do it, and the ambassador's not going to say no to Mr. Nezu. So then the story goes on, and you can see how then these dominoes begin to fall in your direction in terms of bringing these people onto the team, people that can help you in the work that you're doing. The people next to Mr. and Mrs. Nezu in the tie and the kimono there, that's Mr. and Mrs. Yanai. They are the chairman of Uniqlo. You may have heard of Uniqlo, the Japanese clothing company. They are one of the wealthiest families in the world. They are the wealthiest family in Japan. And it was, in doing my research, I found out that Mr. Nezu, who owns railroads, also owns department stores. And Mr. Nezu was the first one to allow the Yanais and Uniqlo to sell their clothing in their department stores. So I told Mr. Nezu, "Would you introduce me to Mr. Yanai, and would you ask him to join the advisory board?" And of course they did, because they couldn't say no to Mr. Nezu. So you'd begin to see the woman in the kimono with the orange obi there, that is Princess Akiko from the Imperial family of Japan. That too is another introduction that we made through our International Advisory Board, who if I just picked up the phone and called the Imperial family, they never would have taken my call. But I worked my way through this network to get to where I needed to be, to have all these people here in Tokyo at our 50th anniversary event supporting the work that we do. We have our International Advisory Board, we have our regular board, we have our foundation board, and all of those bring resources in different ways to the organization. But we also have, in the work that we do, we approach it many times in a different way than just having the staff implement that work. And I'll give you an example. We have our now International Japanese Garden Training Center. And with that center, I have hugely qualified staff here at the Portland Japanese Garden. I like to think I hire the best in the world at what they do, and they are the best in the world at what they do. And they could sit down and they could write this training center, they could create it, they could create the methodology for it, they could write the textbook for it with no problem at all. And that would be the easy thing to do. But we do things the hard way, in that instead of just doing that, we engage a broader field of experts and bring them in and engage them in the process of creating this new program so that they have ownership in the program as well. And so for this particular program, we convened a group of experts, and we brought them in from all over the world, from Japan, from London, from North America, and we said, here's our idea for this training center, and we want to bounce some ideas off of you. Well, they all became engaged and enthralled, and they spent 3 or 4 days here kind of pouring through this and brainstorming with us. It made the whole training center stronger because we had more eyes working on it, looking at it, more hands working on it. But the other thing is that they took ownership of it as well. And I have to say, it ended up resulting in one of those members of that group making a 7-figure gift to support the training center a couple of years after it was established. So you can see how you never know in doing these things what's going to come of it, but you just have faith that if you're putting the right people in the room, that great things are going to happen. So we also have other relationships, of course, that are outside of the formal groups that we have or that we convene. And so what I would say to you is, with each of these, just understand that you're ready to take on those relationships, that you can fulfill those relationships, that you can manage those relationships, because once you're in, there's an expectation on the other side that you're going to continue to engage with them. And so thinking about the kinds of groups and organizations that you want to align yourself with. So what we've done is we have identified strategically, as I said, some of these organizations that we want to be closer with than others, and we've created actual cooperative agreements which we sign with them. And we say, hey, as an organization, institution, here are the things, some of the things we want to do together, and we want to memorialize that. So I think it's important, again, because they take ownership of the relationship, and they have more to bring to the table in that way. And we also have more to bring to the table because it feels more serious, it's more substantial. So I'll show this next slide, which is really just to say, take time to celebrate these moments. This is myself and Mr. Kato from Kato Zoen, a landscape company in Kyoto. He is responsible for the maintenance of many of the most important gardens in Kyoto. And so we wanted this cooperative agreement with him. Again, some of which we knew where it would take us and what we needed from that relationship, but some of the things we didn't know. But we took time to stop and sign a signing agreement. And then we both did an exhibition of each other's organizations at our organizations. We had articles in the newsletter about it, and we really talked it up. And now Mr. Kato, not only is he collaborating with us, but he's become one of the faculty members of our new training center as well. And we are now able to send our gardeners to Kyoto with his company to train in Kyoto when we need to. So there's so many benefits to having these cooperative agreements because it takes on a different kind of ownership. So kickoff events, signing ceremonies, cocktail parties, to remember all of these things, I think are really important. This next slide also demonstrates a relationship that we have. And it talks about evolving. I want to talk about evolving the relationships once you have them. This is a famous shrine in Kamakura, Japan. It is one of the most important shrines in Japan. And the gentleman in the middle there, who I'll show you soon on another slide, he is essentially the functional head of the Shinto church in Japan. So it's a very important shrine there. And so through one of my international advisory board members, I forged a relationship with this gentleman. And at first we invited them to come and do some ceremonial Shinto dances at the garden, and they came and people were really enthralled by it. Then we took it to the next step, and 2 years later, when we were ready for the groundbreaking of our new village, we invited them to come and do a special blessing at the garden, and they came and did that. Then when we had the grand opening, we invited them to come back again. Well, then an amazing thing happened, and the tsunami hit Japan. And of course, devastation in Japan. Well, we had these two torii gates which sit in front of many of the gardens and shrines in Japan. They're the red gates that stand at the entrance to these temples and shrines. Well, they spent 2 years floating across the ocean, and they landed in Oregon. We were able to find the shrines that these gates came from and return them to Japan, to their rightful place, and rebuild them and rededicate them to this community in northern Japan. And who did we turn to for help with that and helping to find where these came from, but was our friend, who is, of course, the functional head of the Shinto church in Japan. So we evolved that relationship to where we're also looking into his reach across the country and helping us to find the location where we could rebuild these. Not only that, but when I went to him and I mentioned him over dinner that, gee, you know, everybody has donated everything. I said, we just need another $25,000 to finalize this project and make it go. Without hesitating, he made the last donation to make sure that those gates got back. So not only did he bring all these resources to the table, but he also became a donor to the garden in a significant way. So understanding that maintaining these relationships is about evolving them and moving them forward, and not just looking at them and viewing them as a one-off project basis, but it's about how do we build a relationship that's going to last into the future. So leveraging these relationships. So one of the other things that I would suggest if you have time, and I recommend this not just for staff, but for CEOs of organizations as well, is to really immerse yourself in the opportunity to broaden your network. I have been fortunate here at the Japanese Garden where in my 15 years, I've been awarded 2 sabbaticals by the organization. And these sabbaticals were given merely with the purpose of going to Japan and traveling around the world to broaden our horizons, to expand our networks in those places. And so on 2 occasions, I took 6 months. And it doesn't have to be 6 months. It can be 2 weeks. It can be 3 months. It can be whatever you can spare. But to go and to not have the responsibility of running your organization or doing your day-to-day job, whatever level of the organization you may be in, and just to focus on one thing and one thing alone, and that's meeting people, expanding your horizons, expanding your relationships wherever they may take you. So I want to recommend that as a specific strategy. That's a more difficult one. I understand that not everyone has the financial resources, the resource of time, or the support to do that. But even if you can do that, if it's a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever the time frame is, where you let everything else go and you're merely out there with no other purpose other than to make introductions of your organization, of yourself, and to meet people. I recommend that as well. So now in the implementation of all this, I want you to also remember about communications, because that's really important. Having touches with people, reaching out to people. Once you've created these relationships, people want to hear from you. They want to know what's happening. So we actually have our regular newsletter, which we send out, and we add people as we expand our network, as all of you do out there. But for us, we are unique in that we work in a bilingual world. So I also have, from the desk of Steve Bloom, a bilingual newsletter that we send to Japan once a quarter. And it's an opportunity for our partners in Japan to not only have something to read in their own language about what's going on, but to share with other people who might not speak English about the work that we're doing. And we found that to be a really great tool. So I think that's critical is don't forget. I have my call list and that includes the people that I have to call here on a regular basis, but it also includes the touches of these people with our strategic alliances. And do not call them just to ask them for something. Call them just to see how they're doing or to update them on what's going on. People don't like to feel like you only call them when you want something from them. Put yourself in that position. Build an endearing and lasting and more meaningful relationship than I need something from you. And those people are going to end up giving to you so much more than you ever expected. So, and this is where it comes into the little things. Remembering people's birthday. You don't have to remember everybody's birthday. Remembering that somebody likes this wine or this sake and sending them a surprise gift out of the blue that just says, really appreciate what you do for our organization, for the garden. Japan has this wonderful tradition in August where it's called Ochugen, where they just send gifts to people that they love and they're thinking about. So it's not Christmas and it's just a little something, but it's a way of saying, hey, in the middle of the heat of the summer, I'm thinking about you and I'm not asking for anything. And so we do that here from the garden, is that we'll send Ochugen to Japan, and usually it's, you know, a shameless self-promotion, but it's just a little gift to say we're thinking about you. And we send New Year's cards. And so we really think strategically about all of these things throughout the course of the year, and we schedule them in. They don't happen by accident. We budget for them and we schedule them. So keep that in mind as you're going through your budgeting process. So I want to talk about some of the now benefits and some of the things to watch out for as well in this kind of philosophy in running your organization. Because it really is an outward way of running your organization. It's not just about us here today. The benefits are incredible, we have found. From a programming standpoint, we have had doors open for us that we never thought possible. And that has to do with the arts, the culture programming that we do, the garden programming that we do, the workshops. This photo here is of a kabuki performance that we put on here at the garden. It had always been my dream to be able to put on a kabuki performance here at the Portland Japanese Garden. And for a grand opening, I wanted to do that 3 years ago in 2017. And I kept going and going and going after this company, the main company in Japan that does kabuki, and they wanted nothing to do with me because I ran a garden, and what does a garden have to do with kabuki? But through my relationships with my international advisory board, I pulled some triggers, and I got a meeting with the president of the company finally, and I was able to convince them to come here and do this. But it was only because I had these other relationships already existing in Japan. The cold calling didn't work for me in this case. It was only because of the work that I had done in advance through building other relationships that got this door open for me. And for the first time outside of Japan, anywhere in the world, they did a performance of kabuki in a Japanese garden outside of Japan. And the actors loved it. And this company that didn't want to do this performance actually loved it so much that they've come back to us, and we're working on bringing them back. And we are helping them stage a West Coast tour of kabuki here in the United States. So you can see how this blossoms and how all the parties really benefit from this. All of this helps with your networking. Of course, that's what it is. It's networking. And networking also leads to fundraising. It's another great benefit of the work that we do here. Through these contacts, people have become donors. That international advisory board that started with one guy after I hired Kengo Kuma, which is now 14 people in Japan, that international advisory board, out of a $37 million capital campaign, gave $14 million out of the $37 million that we raised. It's because we put the time in over time, and we cultivated those relationships. It was going to Japan. It was inviting them here, having them see the work that we do, understand the work that we do, and then they were willing to invest in it. So this is one of these great benefits where you go into this and you don't know what's going to happen. Because somebody has the capacity to give doesn't mean they have the willingness to give. And by building these relationships, you move them from capacity to willingness. And that's how this philosophy really is effective. The other thing that we found is the benefits of human resources. So through all of this, I remember Mr. Kato, who we had that agreement signing with there. Well, through working with him over several years, we got to know his staff, and some of his staff came over here to work with us. And there was one gentleman who is hugely talented on the staff, Mr. Hugo Torri, who I got to know through that time, who also speaks really good English because he went to international school. So I kept in touch with Mr. Torri, and when we had an opening for our director of grounds maintenance, I called Hugo up and I said, Hugo, how would you like to move to America? And so one of the great advantages that we took from this relationship with Mr. Kato and his company was that we hired one of his best people away to come here to America. And Mr. Kato was like, hey, he's at the point where he needs to fly and do something else and move him to the next stage. And so it was a win-win for everybody. But that human resource would never have happened if we hadn't forged that relationship over there in Japan. And then intellectual resource. This gentleman here is a 16-generation stonemason from Japan. His family for 16 generations have been building the castle walls in Japan. When we did our expansion here, we knew we had to have this retaining wall, and we didn't want just an ugly retaining wall. We wanted something that was going to be, as we said, either equal or greater quality than the existing garden. And so we decided to build ourselves a castle wall. And it was through these relationships in this network. We had no relationship with him in advance for this expertise, because this, in fact, is a dying art form in Japan. And so I remember standing there at the castle wall as we were beginning to construction on it. And I asked him, I said, well, gee, are you excited about this project? And he looked at me and he said, you know, my family's been doing this for 16 generations. He says, but this is the first brand new castle wall I've ever built. He said, because no one's building castles in Japan anymore. And so what we have is we have this craft that is dying in Japan, and trying to find these people without the network that we had built is in some ways impossible with some of these very specific crafts and skill sets. And so having spent the time and built the network in Japan, it didn't take us very long to get to this guy and to invite him over. And now we have this spectacular wall here. Since that time, NHK, the television broadcasting company in Japan, has actually done a documentary on this gentleman and on the wall. And so this one little project and having these networks and getting to him and the work that we did has blossomed into so much more. So those are some of the benefits of doing these kinds of things that are really tangible benefits that I can draw as examples for you. So some of the pitfalls are, of course, it takes time and energy to manage, you know, all these relationships. So don't get stretched too thin. Realize what your capacity is, what your organization can handle to manage all of these different things, and only take on what you can manage at any one time. But also I want to say to you, recognize opportunities. So with creating these relationships, there's always opportunities that will make you stronger down the road, and keep your mind open to what those may be. The 2008 recession, we were getting, just beforehand, we were getting ready to launch our capital campaign. Of course, the recession hit and there was no way we were going to raise $37 million. So that's when I decided to take that time and go to Japan and spend that time just meeting people. Well, so many of these relationships in terms of craftsmen, in terms of international advisory board members, in terms of stonemasons and gardeners that we brought to bear on this project came during that Great Recession, where instead of raising money, I was raising friends over in Japan. And now, in this great time of this pandemic and what's happening with us, 2020 was to be the year of the launch of our new Japan Institute, a global center for all things great about Japan. And we realized that we've had to put that on the back burner, and we're going to relaunch that in 2022. But I'm looking at it in the same way as we did with the 2008 recession, is that 2020 is just going to be an opportunity for us to take a step back, take a 1,000-foot view, look forward, and figure out ways that we can expand the network so that it's even more successful when we're ready to launch it in 2020. This project was more successful because we took the time to do that, and our next project, the Japan Institute, will be as well. So in all of this, I want you to think about the pictures that I showed you. And many of you probably expected that I would show you beautiful pictures of the Portland Japanese garden. But actually, the point of all this isn't the garden, but the point is more the people. And so all those pictures I showed you were not of the garden per se, but they were the people that we work with and the people who built this garden. And so that's the most important thing in my view. We get so caught up at times with the horticulture and the science and the politics and the day-to-day work and in the weeds of everything that we have to do. But sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the garden is really a platform for interaction with our visitors and with our members and with our constituents, with our field. And it's really all about the people. At the end of the day, this work is about people. And our greatest measurement of success is how each individual person reacts and responds with the garden each and every day. I think the other great lesson of this pandemic is that without people, a garden is a garden and it's just a bunch of plants. Our gardens are empty and people are just beginning to return to them and they're coming in droves because they miss them. So I want us to think about that. Don't get so wrapped up in the garden without remembering, no, it's the people. That's why we exist. We do this work every day to touch people's lives. Never forget that. Thank you so much, and I hope that all of you are well and safe wherever you are, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the coming years with our conference that will be in Portland soon. Thank you.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
You're with us for real for some questions. So glad to have you today.
So glad to be here. Thank you very much. Welcome from Portland.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful. Well, we do have time for a few questions. And people have been voting on those questions, which is wonderful. We've got a lot of people wanting to know some answers. You advise not overreaching institutional capacity, understanding the resources that you have. What advice do you have for those very small gardens? I think there's a lot of small gardens out there who are saying, I don't have the resources of the Portland Japanese garden. Can you put these same principles into application for a smaller scale?
Sure. You know, we did not have resources when I started the garden 15 years ago as well. You know, we are now 500,000 visitors and a $13 million budget. When I started, we have 140 staff. When I started, we had 17 staff. We were a $1 million budget, and we had 100,000 visitors. And it was actually through these strategies of building these networks that we were able to grow to what we are today, 15 years later, because it was able to provide those resources. So for executives, for individuals, again, if you believe as an organization and your staff that this is a strategy that you want to enlist, and you have those conversations about that, then all it takes is you each individually making those calls and reaching out to build those relationships, but deciding together what's important and not having everyone go off on their own. You know, I mentioned about my Curators Quarterly, where we talk about the strategic alliances. So it's everybody being in the same room, on the same page and saying, okay, these are the 3 relationships we want to build this year that are going to be important to us in the future. And not just releasing everyone to go out and build any kinds of relationships that they want. So it's step by step, and those things build on each other over time.
So what you just mentioned about, you know, not just scattering around and building relationships, you know, having the staff go in every direction. One of the other questions I think a lot of our attendees are interested in is your description of strategic alliances and shared values and how internally an organization comes to that. Can you talk a little bit about how you internally work to identify those key areas and relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. We do it both on a broad organizational level, in which when we do our board retreats, we're talking about resources that we need to accomplish, you know, down the road. But then every week when we have our senior staff meetings as well, we're thinking strategically about what do we need and what direction are we going in. We're always doing what we call needs assessment. We're always assessing what are the needs out there that we're going to need in the short term and the long term, who has that relationship, or how can we get that relationship to do it. So again, it's got to be part of your regular process. If you are only doing that when something comes along, it's less effective than if you're really thinking out ahead, constantly doing as an organization at all levels of the organization, what we call these needs assessments. And it's even like for building our boards, when we're recruiting new board members, we don't just go out there and say, Joe Smith loves gardens, let's invite him onto the board. No, we sit down and we say, let's do a needs assessment. This year, we don't have any attorneys on the board. We need an attorney. We're going to be going into a construction project, so we need someone who understands construction on our board for the next 5 years. We need someone who thinks globally because we're launching this new Japan Institute. So how do we get someone who's run an international organization before? So really looking and being specific and strategic about doing needs assessments across the organization.
That's fantastic. And I think it's really interesting how engaged, I'm sure your staff feels very engaged in that process.
Yeah, and they really have ownership of the process too, which is important. It can't just be me, and nor do I want it to just be me. So share that work with your staff, and it makes them even more effective and helps them grow as staff as well.
No, that's very helpful to many, I'm sure. We've recently seen gardens doing so many new things, being in their communities, unfortunately, many folks didn't see the bulbs that were blooming in a lot of gardens this spring. But we saw a lot of innovation. We saw gardens carrying those bulbs over into the hospitals. There were a lot of interesting relationships that have come from this, the COVID situation. Are there some other ideas you have that gardens might right now think about in terms of building new community relationships they might not have thought of before?
Yeah, I think for all of us, it's been taking a look at how do we continue to touch, I said at the end, the work we do is about touching people's lives. And so in this time of COVID, when people are at home, how do we continue to touch those people's lives, even if maybe they can't come to the garden or they're coming to the garden under different circumstances? Some of the things we've done, we've even reached out to our volunteers and members when we realized that we have a group of people who maybe are in a compromised situation and they can't go to the supermarket. We had our staff who was laid off. We laid off over 100 staff, and many of them volunteered of their own time to go and bring food to our members or bring food to our volunteers because they did not feel safe going to a supermarket or providing them with whatever they needed. We also, for another example of engaging our membership in the work that we were doing, when we were coming back, we reached out to our membership. We have 21,000 members and said, hey, when we come back, for your safety and for our safety, we're all going to be wearing masks. And so I've got my mask right here. So we asked members to make masks and donate them for us. And so we had something like 700 masks were made by our members and then donated to the garden so that my staff and visitors here felt safe. So finding ways that, maybe they can't come to the garden, but they can engage with us and they feel part of the coming back and part of the reopening, even though maybe they're not in a place where they can come back to the garden. And then I think the last thing is, of course, we've all had to learn this, and it's the technology piece. We have talked for years about how do we utilize technology because we are becoming more and more, as an institution, we're becoming more global. We have, projects and constituents across the world as the Portland Japanese Garden. So it's always been on the back burner that, okay, we've got to be able to do these video conferencing and posting things and, Facebook and Instagram Live and all of that. This has forced us to actually do it, right? And I think that has been a great benefit. It has accelerated that process that for all of us. And so like I said, use this time to take advantage of the time to build these things now and do it. Now's the time to do it. You look at your own organization and what is important to you, but engage those people wherever they are in the work of your organization, even when they can't come to the garden.
Those are some really powerful examples you just shared. Those are wonderful. It's so clear that the foundational relationships you have in the community are really so active right now. Even though people are, as you say, possibly afraid to even venture out of their homes.
Well, and I'll just also add that when we ended up closing, as with many of our gardens, it was at our worst cash flow time of year, right? We had, we built up our cash reserves in the summer, we spend them down in the winter. March hits, we're out of cash. Crowds are supposed to come again and replenish our accounts. Well, we shut down. We stopped all of, we had no revenue coming in, zero revenue coming in. In about 6 weeks, those relationships, we put forward and said, we need your help. And those relationships brought in $500,000 in donations to bridge us through, to help keep our furloughed employees with health insurance, to help keep a skeletal staff on so that the garden was still being cared for, because we were seasonally out of cash. And so all those relationships in our time of need came to bear, and they stepped forward and gave more than $500,000. Half of that money came from over 1,000 small donors, which is also really remarkable. So yes, it's the big relationships, but it's those other relationships that we maintain across the spectrum of the garden that were as important as the big relationships.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions. But Steve Bloom, thank you for a really wonderful plenary talk today. And also many thanks to the Portland Japanese Garden for sponsoring today. We're so sad not to be with you in Portland right now. Steve, in fact, I can picture you there in the serene beauty of the Portland Japanese Garden with all the glorious gardens of Washington Park. If only I could smell the conifers and the coffee and the hoppy beer.
Steve, thank you on behalf of all of us for a great talk.
Howdy from Dunn Gardens in Seattle, Washington. I'm Mark, this is Casey, and we hope you have a great conference.
Hi, it's Joan Thomas again from the Association, here to talk to you briefly about the Association's Garden Scholars Program. The Garden Scholars Program offers 2 cycles per year for institutional and individual members at any level of their professional development to apply for scholarship assistance to attend an annual conference or a professional development symposium. Scholarships are funded by contributions from you, our members, and by our generous sponsors, Bartlett Tree Experts, the Leash Tag Foundation, Kittleman and Associates, and the Longwood Gardens Fellows Program. Even though we've had to postpone our in-person events for the time being, our 2020 Garden Scholars will still get to attend our virtual events this year and then attend in person next year, along with our 2021 Garden Scholars. So please take a moment to help me recognize and congratulate this spring's Garden Scholars. The association is also proud to partner with the Garden Club of America for a fellowship grant opportunity, the Hope Goddard Island Fellowship Award. This award of $5,000 is to a student enrolled in a graduate-level university program to study public horticulture through experiential learning that takes place at a recognized public garden, botanic garden, arboretum, or other closely aligned public horticulture institution in the United States. This year's recipient is Andy Fusco from Oklahoma State University. Andy is working on his MS degree at OSU and working in partnership with Todd Lassane at the Tulsa Botanic Garden on the use of native plants in public gardens. Congratulations to Andy and to all of our Garden Scholars, and thank you for your support of this important association program.
To our friends at APGA from the Atlanta Botanical Garden.
Life moves on!
As we start this afternoon's session, we open with the presentation of the association's most honored and highest achievement for an individual, the Honorary Life Member Award. This isn't an award we give out every year. It's very special. So when we do it, it's to honor someone extraordinary who's built and dedicated their entire career to advancing public gardens. And this year, we honor a man whose name has been synonymous with the Morris Arboretum of the University of Pennsylvania for well over 3 decades. His name, Paul Meyer. Do you not know Paul? If not, a few words from Paul should be all you need to understand that he is one of the great leaders of public horticulture. Many consider him to be an unsung hero, but I'm lucky enough to know that Paul has done more to contribute to generations of future leaders than many people realize or understand. Paul started at the Morris Arboretum in the University of Pennsylvania in 1976 as curator of its living collections. Working from the ground up, literally, he was promoted first to director of horticulture in 1983, and then spent 28 years of his life as its executive director before his retirement in 2019. Paul transformed the Arboretum over 43 years with new plantings, a building called the Horticulture Center, and he headed the renovation of the Victorian Fern Conservatory, and much, much more. He's also a leader in international plant explorations, 11 trips to East Asia, an accomplished photographer, and all of this is profiled in the book Morris Arboretum Through the Lens of Paul W. Meyer. Paul has been an amazing servant to our association with his leadership. He's a former board member, and he received the association's professional citation in 2001 and the Award of Merit in 2013. This year, it's our honor to confer upon you, Paul Meyer, the Honorary Life Member Award from the American Public Gardens Association. Thank you, Paul.
also Maine Botanical Gardens in Booth Bay, Maine.
Hi, everyone. I'd like now to take a few minutes for a brief introduction to the simple to use but seriously powerful association benchmarking platform. Benchmarking is a critical tool for our member gardens, and it's an invaluable benefit of your institution's membership in the association, but it's also critical for you as an individual because it provides an incredible amount of utility regardless of what information you're seeking. It has information about our entire industry that we have and you can use to show the vital role that you play within that industry, where you want to go in that industry, or the collective impact that our industry has as a whole on the nation. Most recently, it gave us the ability to estimate the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic on our world, on our horticulture industry. That information was transformative in our ability to talk about how much we were losing either on a per garden basis or collectively when we estimated we were losing over $3 million a day in earned revenue as member gardens, and we were losing $1.2 million a day in horticulture and facilities expenses alone, vastly increasing our advocacy efforts. But we can't say those things unless you and your garden enter that data. So please, that portal is open for data entry now. It literally takes seconds. It's simple to use, but seriously powerful, and gives you, your garden, and all of us the vital information we need to stay relevant right now. Garden benchmarking compiles basic information about gardens and in-depth information about programming, volunteer programs, financial portfolios, and staffing, and much, much more. Conservation and biodiversity benchmarking provides your garden's leadership and the stakeholders for conservation with quantifiable statements on how we're addressing critical things in relation to plant conservation and biodiversity and gene protection at our gardens nationwide and throughout the world. We partner with Botanic Gardens Conservation International and the United States Botanic Garden to offer this portion of our benchmarking platform to you, and it's a seriously valuable piece. Compensation and benefits benchmarking provides executive garden leaders and their designees with the tools they need to make sure that their salary rates for both their existing and proposed staff are in line with our entire industry profession. It even includes cost of living index adjusted rates so that you can figure out what similar job titles hold and have salary and benefits for nationwide. All of our benchmarking platforms are open now for data entry. You can learn more about them on our website at www.publicgardens.org.
Hey, we wanted to send you greetings from the Florida Botanical Gardens in the great state of Florida in the Tampa Bay region. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary, and we're glad to be a part of the American Public Garden Association. Have fun at the conference.
Current sessions are now starting. Please click live sessions, scroll down to find your session.